What if the worst day of your life was secretly the beginning of the greatest love story you never saw coming? And we mean that literally, because Ethan Cole, 34 years old, worth $11 billion, feared by competitors and worshipped by Wall Street, opened his eyes one morning and saw absolutely nothing. Not darkness, not shadows, nothing. And somewhere in the same broken city, a young woman named Ada was scrubbing someone else's floors, trying to survive a world that had already taken everything from her. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate doesn't ask for permission. Stay with us, because this story is going to change the way you see love forever. If you believe love finds you when you least expect it, smash that subscribe button and let's begin. The night it happened, Ethan Cole was exactly where he always was, in control. His black Bentley Continental sliced through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a blade through still water. His phone was pressed to his ear, his jaw tight with the kind of tension that came not from fear, but from power. He was closing a deal, a hostile takeover worth $3.7 billion, and his opponent on the other end of the line had just made the mistake of threatening him. Ethan laughed. It was a cold laugh, quiet, the kind of laugh that made grown men reconsider their career choices. "You have until midnight," he said. "After that, I own you." He ended the call without waiting for a response. His driver, Marcus, glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. In 6 years of working for Ethan Cole, Marcus had learned that silence was the safest language to speak in this car. Outside, the city blurred past in streaks of gold and red. Billboards, taxicabs, street vendors shutting down for the night. A world full of people living ordinary lives, lives Ethan had never understood and never cared to. He had been born into privilege, yes, but he had not inherited his empire. He had built it, brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrifice by sacrifice. He had given up friendships, relationships, sleep, and eventually any version of himself that might have been warm or tender. At 34, Ethan Cole had everything, and he felt absolutely nothing. It was the truck that changed everything. It came from the side street, a delivery vehicle with a blown hydraulic brake, its driver desperately pumping a pedal that no longer responded. It didn't slow. It didn't stop. It hit the Bentley at 62 miles per hour on the passenger side. The world folded. Metal screamed. Glass exploded inward like 1,000 small stars. Ethan's body was thrown sideways, and his head, his brilliant, calculating, ruthless head, struck the window frame with a force that fractured the temporal bone just above his right eye. Marcus survived with a broken arm and 3 cracked ribs. Ethan was airlifted to Columbia University Medical Center. He was unconscious for 11 days. When he woke, the room was bright, the nurses later told him, flooded with afternoon light, but Ethan Cole saw only black. He lay very still for a long moment. Then, quietly, with a control that frightened everyone in the room, he said, "Someone tell me what's wrong with my eyes." The neurologist, a man named Dr. Patel, who had delivered devastating news 100 times, sat down slowly. He explained that the trauma to the temporal lobe had caused a catastrophic disruption to the optic nerve pathways. The technical term was cortical blindness. The honest translation was this: the damage was permanent. Ethan would never see again. The room was silent for a very long time, and then Ethan Cole did something no one expected. He didn't rage, he didn't weep, he didn't demand second opinions or scream at the universe for its cruelty. He simply closed his eyes, eyes that could no longer open onto anything, and said, "Leave me alone." The weeks that followed were the darkest of Ethan's life, and we don't use that word lightly. He returned to his penthouse on the 53rd floor of the Cole Tower, a glass and steel monument to his own ambition, and he shut the world out. His board of directors panicked. His CFO tried to schedule emergency meetings. His personal assistant, a crisp woman named Helen, fielded 100 calls a day from people who needed Ethan Cole to be functional again. But Ethan wasn't functional. He sat in his darkened living room, darkened to him regardless of whether the lights were on or off, and he tried to relearn how to exist. He knocked over glasses, he misjudged doorways and walked into walls. He picked up his phone and could not read a single notification. He, who had memorized market data and financial projections with photographic precision, could not find the bathroom without help. Pride had always been Ethan's armor, and now that armor was being stripped from him, piece by humiliating piece. He fired 3 personal nurses in 2 weeks. He threw a breakfast tray across the room when someone tried to spoon-feed him. He told his younger sister Claire to stop crying when she visited, because your tears won't fix anything and they're exhausting to listen to. He was, by every measure, impossible. But underneath the ice, if you listened very carefully, you could hear the sound of a man quietly breaking.
Ada Mensah arrived at Cole Tower on a Tuesday morning in October. She was 27 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived enough hardship to know that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you. She had been hired through the elite domestic staffing agency that managed Ethan's household, not because she had impressive credentials, though she did have a background in hospitality management from a modest university in Lagos before she emigrated, but because 3 other household staff members had already quit and the agency was running out of candidates willing to work for a man the entire industry had quietly labeled the impossible client. Ada needed the job. She needed it desperately. Her mother was ill, a slow-moving but expensive kidney condition that demanded medication Ada could barely afford. Her younger brother was in his 2nd year of college and relying on her monthly transfers. Ada had been working 2 jobs before this, a hotel breakfast shift starting at 5:30 in the morning and an evening cleaning crew that finished at 11 at night, and her body was beginning to give out under the weight of it. The salary Ethan Cole's agency offered was triple what she currently made. So, Ada straightened her back, pressed her uniform, and walked into Cole Tower. Helen, the personal assistant, met her at the penthouse door. Helen was efficient and precise and looked perpetually exhausted. She briefed Ada in a clipped, rapid-fire tone while leading her through the apartment. The penthouse had 4,000 square feet across 2 floors. Mr. Cole was on a reduced work schedule, calls only, no in-person meetings. He had a personal chef for meals, but the chef left at 3 p.m. daily. Ada would be responsible for general housekeeping, laundry, light grocery coordination, and, Helen paused here, lowering her voice, managing the environment so that Mr. Cole doesn't hurt himself. Ada looked up. Hurt himself? He is still adjusting, Helen said carefully, to his new circumstances. He doesn't always know where things are. We've been asked not to rearrange furniture, ever, and not to leave anything on the floor. And when he is in a room, don't sneak up on him. Announce yourself. Ada nodded slowly. Also, Helen added, already heading toward the elevator, don't take anything he says personally. He's not a kind man on a good day. On a bad day, he is, she paused, searching for a diplomatic word, then apparently giving up, exactly what you'd expect. The elevator doors closed. Ada stood alone in the marble foyer of the most expensive apartment she had ever entered. She took a breath. Then she picked up her cleaning caddy, walked to the kitchen, and got to work. She didn't meet him until the afternoon. She was in the main living room, dusting the bookshelves along the east wall, shelves that held hundreds of physical books Ethan could no longer read, when she heard footsteps. She turned. He was tall, taller than she had imagined, 6 feet 2, lean but broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he had once been athletic and hadn't entirely lost it. He wore a white shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers, and he walked with one hand slightly forward, fingertips lightly grazing the back of the sofa as he navigated toward the window. A habit, she realized, a way of mapping space. He stopped. "Someone is in this room," he said. His voice was flat, precise, not a question. "Yes, sir. My name is Ada. I'm the new housekeeper. I'm sorry, I should have announced myself." A pause. "Ada," he repeated, as if cataloging it. "Yes, sir.
Don't call me sir. My name is Ethan. Use it. He moved to the armchair by the window and sat, turning his face toward the glass, toward a view of Manhattan he could no longer see. Ada went back to work. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't hostile. It was careful. Two people testing the edges of a new dynamic. After a moment, Ethan spoke again. "You're not from here," he said. Ada paused. "No, originally from Nigeria. I've been in New York for 4 years." Another pause. "You're not afraid of me," he said. She considered this. Should I be? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller. Something he wasn't sure how to do anymore. "Everyone else is," he said simply. Ada looked at his profile, the sharp jaw, the expensive watch on his wrist, the eyes that stared at the glass without seeing anything beyond it. She felt something move in her chest. Not pity. She had been careful with pity her whole life and had been on the receiving end of it too many times to offer it carelessly. It was something else, something that looked, if she was honest, a lot like recognition. "I've been afraid of a lot of things," she said quietly, going back to her work. "I've learned it doesn't help much." He said nothing, but he didn't leave the room either. If this story is pulling at your heart already, you're not alone. Subscribe so you never miss stories like this, and comment below. Do you believe love is truly blind?
The weeks passed. A rhythm developed, the way rhythms always do between two people who share a space long enough. Ada learned his patterns. She knew he woke at 6:15, that he took his coffee black with no sugar, that he spent the first hour of his morning sitting in silence with the news podcast playing through the speakers because he could no longer read the morning papers he'd once devoured. She learned that he hated the sound of things being moved without warning, that he knew, with an almost eerie precision, exactly how many steps it was from his bedroom to the kitchen, from the study to the main bathroom. He had memorized the map of his home with the focus of a man refusing to surrender. She learned that he wasn't cruel, exactly. He was armored. There was a difference. And he, in turn, though he would never have admitted it, learned her. He learned the sound of her footsteps, lighter on the left side, a slight asymmetry she was probably unaware of. He learned that she hummed under her breath when she was focused, something soft and melodic, a song he didn't recognize in a language he didn't speak. He learned that she said, "Sorry, coming through," every single time she entered a room he was in, without fail, even after he told her once, curtly, that it wasn't necessary. She did it anyway. He stopped telling her not to. It was a Wednesday morning when it happened. Ada was changing the linens in the master bedroom, a task she usually completed while Ethan was on his morning calls in the study. But the call had ended early, and she didn't hear him coming. She was reaching across the wide expanse of the bed, smoothing the fitted sheet over the far corner, her body stretched and off balance, when the bedroom door opened. Ethan walked in with the particular focused confidence of a man who had memorized a room. Right hand forward, reading the air. Ada straightened quickly. "Sorry, I'm in here. I'm finishing the..." But it was too late. He had already taken 3 steps into the room, his hand extended at chest height to find the wardrobe door he always used as a landmark. His hand found something else. The room froze. His palm, warm, large, tentative, had landed squarely and unmistakably against the curve of Ada's chest. Right hand, right there, for exactly 2 seconds that lasted the length of a lifetime. Neither of them moved. Ethan's hand dropped immediately. He took a step back, his jaw tightened, and a flush, the first real color she had ever seen in his face, crawled up his neck. He started, stopped. Something passed across his face that he had never seen there before. Something cracked. He tried again. "I apologize. I wasn't..." He stopped again. Ethan Cole, who could dissect a multi-billion-dollar negotiation without losing a syllable, had run out of words. Ada's heart was hammering. She should have laughed it off. She should have said, "It's fine, don't worry about it," in the brisk, professional tone she used to manage uncomfortable moments.
She had learned that tone over years of working in other people's spaces, navigating a world where her comfort was always the last priority. But something about his face stopped her. He looked, and she would think about this for weeks afterward, he looked like a man who had just been reminded he had hands, not the hands of a CEO, not the hands of a billionaire, just hands. Human hands that could reach out and accidentally touch something soft, something real, something that made him feel for one involuntary moment that he was still a person in a world that had begun to feel entirely abstract. "Ethan," she said softly. He stiffened slightly at his name and her voice. "It was an accident. I should have spoken up sooner. It's my fault." His jaw worked. "It wasn't your fault." "It also wasn't yours," she said. A pause. "It was my hand," he said, very quietly, with the ghost of something that might, in a different man, have been dry humor. And Ada, against her better judgment, against every professional instinct she had, laughed. It was a small laugh, surprised out of her, warm and genuine. Ethan went very still. He had not heard someone laugh in this apartment in 3 months. He had forgotten what it sounded like directed at him, not the polished, performative laughs of business dinners or the nervous laughs of employees. A real laugh, unguarded, just because something was a little bit funny and a little bit terrible, and somehow both at once. He didn't move for a moment. Then he turned and walked out of the room, but at the doorway he paused. "Ada," he said, without turning around. "Yes." A beat. "Thank you." She wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking her for. She wasn't entirely sure he knew either. Something shifted after that morning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't declared. There were no speeches and no grand gestures. It was quieter than that. The kind of shift that happens between two people when the pretense of distance becomes harder to maintain than the risk of closeness. Ethan started lingering. He would finish his calls, and instead of retreating to the study, he would come and sit in whatever room Ada was working in, not speaking necessarily, just present, like a man who had been alone too long and didn't know how to ask for company, but had figured out how to arrange himself near it. Ada noticed. She didn't comment, she kept working, but she started talking, not asking for permission, not filling silences nervously, just talking, narrating small things. "There's a scratch on the coffee table, by the way. Someone must have caught it with something. I can try to buff it out." Or, "Your chef left a note. He's adjusting the menu for next week. Apparently, he's very opinionated about winter produce." Small things, ordinary things. Ethan discovered that ordinary things had a texture he had never paid attention to before. The world had always been abstract to him, made of numbers and strategies and outcomes. Now it was sounds and temperatures and the particular rhythm of someone else's voice in a room. "What does it look like outside today?" he asked one afternoon. It came out more quietly than he intended. Ada crossed to the window. "Gray," she said, "but the kind of gray that's almost silver, like the sky can't decide if it's sad or beautiful." He was quiet for a moment. "That's an odd way to describe weather," he said. "I know, I do that." "Don't stop," he said. She didn't. She told him about Lagos, the heat of it, the noise of it, the way the city smelled of fried food and fuel and the ocean all at once, and how she had loved it and left it and carried it with her anyway. She told him about her mother, not with self-pity, but with a frankness that caught him off guard, as Ada approached most things he was learning, directly, without performance. He told him things too, slowly, like a man releasing pressure from a valve he had kept sealed for years. He told her about the accident, not the clinical facts, which everyone knew, but the feeling of waking up to darkness, the specific, terrible quietness of a world that had lost all its visual noise. The first week, I kept thinking I was dreaming. I kept waiting to wake up, and then I realized, he paused, the waiting was the dream. This is the part that's real. Ada set down what she was doing. "How do you keep going?" she asked. He almost smiled.
Poorly, he said. You've seen the evidence. You've seen someone learning, she said quietly. There's a difference. He turned his face toward her voice. This was a habit he had developed, orienting himself towards sound the way a flower orients towards light. Ada had noticed it weeks ago, and it started holding still when she wanted his full attention so he could find her. You're very good at that, he said. At what? Making difficult things sound like they're survivable. She thought of her mother's medical bills, of the 2 jobs, of the night 3 years ago when she had sat on the floor of a tiny apartment in the Bronx and cried until there was nothing left, and then gotten up and made a plan. They usually are. Survivable, I mean, she said softly. Usually, he repeated. Usually, she confirmed. The problem, of course, was this. The closer Ethan leaned toward Ada's voice, the more he felt something happening inside him that he had no vocabulary for. He was a man who had succeeded by mastering his environments. But this, whatever was building in the space between them, this was something he could not strategize or control. It frightened him. Not the way the darkness frightened him. The darkness was a clean, total thing. This was different. This was the fear of something being possible that he had no right to want. He was his employee. She was kind and good, and she had a life full of real difficulties that had nothing to do with him. And he was a blind billionaire who had spent 3 decades building walls so high that even when people stood on the other side of them, they might as well have been in a different country. He told himself it was gratitude, proximity, the predictable human tendency to attach to whoever eased the suffering. He told himself this for about 3 weeks. Then, one evening when Ada was leaving for the night and said, "Good night, Ethan," just those 2 words in that particular voice, and he heard himself say good night back, and then stood in the hallway after the door closed, just standing there in the dark that was always dark now, feeling the absence of her like a sudden drop in temperature. He understood. He was in love with her. He sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then he went to find a very expensive glass of scotch and tried to talk himself out of it. He didn't confess right away. He was Ethan Cole. He did not do things impulsively. He made plans. The problem was that his plans kept colliding with the actual reality of Ada. Her laugh, her directness, the way she pushed back when he was being unreasonable, which was often, and the way she never let his sharpness cut her, because she was, he had come to realize, quite possibly the toughest person he had ever encountered. She had simply lived too much real life to be intimidated by a bad mood. It was during a power outage in late November. The building's backup generators had failed for 40 minutes during a storm, plunging the penthouse into darkness. The staff had been given instructions. The building would have it resolved in under an hour. Ada, who had been about to leave for the evening, stayed. She found Ethan by sound. He was in the kitchen, and she heard a glass knock against the counter. "I'm here," she said from the doorway. "It's Ada." "I know," he said. "Your footsteps." She crossed the kitchen and stood near him. Outside, lightning lit the sky, a view she could see, and he could not. "There's lightning," she said. "Huge. The whole city just went white for a second." He was quiet. "Ada," he said. Something in the way he said her name made her go still. "Yes?" He turned toward her voice with that careful, deliberate attention of his, and she felt it, the way his entire focus landed on her, the way a blind man's attention is somehow more total than a sighted man's, because it has to be. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond, because I've been thinking about this for weeks, and if you interrupt me, I will lose my nerve and pretend I never started." Ada pressed her lips together. "Okay. I know what this looks like," he said. "I know the obvious objections. You work for me. He paused. "I'm not the same person I was before the accident. I'm not easy. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that what I have to offer is..." He stopped, started again. "I have spent my entire adult life treating people as variables, resources, assets, or liabilities.
I built something enormous out of that approach, and I told myself the emptiness was just efficiency. His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of something held very carefully. You walked into this apartment and you didn't treat me like a tragedy. You didn't treat me like an employer either. You just... He exhaled. You talked to me. You described the sky. You laughed at something I said. You pushed back when I was wrong. And I started waiting for you every morning. Not for the coffee or the none of that. Just... He stopped again. I am telling you, he said quietly, that I am in love with you, and I am not asking you for anything. This isn't pressure. You can walk out that door and take a different placement, and I will make sure Helen gives you the finest reference in the city. But I couldn't keep talking to you every day and not tell you. The lightning came again. The kitchen filled with white light. Ada looked at him, at his face turned toward her voice, those sightless eyes that somehow still managed to look directly at her, and she felt the whole careful structure she had built around her professional life shudder at its foundations. She had told herself the same things he had: employer, employee, inappropriate, impossible. She had told herself that what she felt was sympathy, respect, the natural warmth one develops for someone in their care. She had believed herself too. More or less, until this moment. Ada, she said. You can go, he said quickly, quietly. It's all right. I'm not going, she said. A pause. Ada, you said to let you finish, she said. Now let me. He closed his mouth. I came to this apartment because I needed money, she said. That is the truth. I came for the salary, not for you. I didn't know you. I knew your reputation, which was not flattering. A small sound from him, almost a laugh. But I stayed, she said, because of you, the actual you, the one that sits in the dark and memorizes his apartments because he refuses to be helpless, the one who is terrible at accepting help but is trying anyway, the one who asked me to keep describing the sky like he was memorizing it. That person, I didn't expect him, and I didn't... Her voice shifted, quieter. I didn't plan to feel what I feel. I'm not someone who can afford complications. But you... She crossed the space between them. She reached out and found his hand in the dark. His fingers closed around hers immediately, like a reflex. You are the most complicated complication I've ever encountered, and I'm still here. The storm outside filled the silence. And Ethan Cole, who had survived an accident that stole his sight, who had rebuilt himself in darkness, who had forgotten what it felt like to be reached for, lifted his other hand and found her face in the dark, the way he had learned to find everything now, by feel, by patience, by the courage of moving through uncertainty. His thumb traced her cheekbone, her jaw, the exact shape of a face he had never seen and would never see. You are extraordinary, he whispered. Don't, she said softly. You don't have to. I'm not trying to flatter you. I'm trying to explain something I don't have the right words for. Then don't use words. And when he kissed her, carefully, tentatively, the way a blind man reaches towards something he desperately does not want to break, Ada felt every careful wall she had built around her professional life dissolve the way things dissolve in stories, all at once, and as if they had always been temporary. Outside, the power came back on, the penthouse filled with light. It didn't change a thing. Of course, the world had opinions. The world always does. When the relationship became known, first to Helen, who maintained her perfectly professional composure and said absolutely nothing, then to the board of directors, then to the gossip columns that had been tracking Ethan's recovery with the enthusiasm of vultures, the response was swift and ugly. The billionaire and the maid, that was the headline. Not Ada's name, just her function, the reductive summary of a woman's entire personhood into a single word that was designed to imply she was lesser. Ethan's sister Claire, who had spent 3 months trying to reach him and had been mostly kept at arm's length, arrived at the penthouse unannounced on a Friday afternoon. She was not unkind about it. Claire was, by nature, warmer than her brother, But she was also protective, and she was worried, and those two things together made her clumsy. "Ethan," she said, sitting across from him in the living room while Ada, who had been asked to take a break, could presumably hear every word from the hallway. "You are vulnerable right now. You have been through something traumatic. These feelings are real," he said flatly. "How would you know?" Claire said, and her voice broke a little on it, the way a worried person's voice does when they say something they immediately regret. The room went cold. "Carefully," he said, very quietly. "I just mean, I know what you mean," he said. "You mean that because I can't see her, I can't be trusted to know what I feel, that the accident has compromised my judgment, that she is taking advantage of—" "I didn't say that." "You were building toward it." Claire was silent. "I have spent 34 years seeing the world," Ethan said, "and I spent most of it getting it wrong. I saw wealth and called it success. I saw fear and called it respect. I saw loneliness and called it independence." He paused. "Now I can't see anything, and somehow I'm getting more right than I ever have." A long silence. "She's good to you?" Claire asked finally, quietly. "She is extraordinary," he said, "and she doesn't need me to be anything other than what I am. Do you understand how rare that is?" Claire left without saying much more, but at the door she stopped. "I want to meet her," she said, "properly, at dinner if that's all right." "I'll ask her," he said, and from the hallway, Ada, who had indeed heard most of it, leaned against the wall and pressed her hand to her mouth and felt something ache in her chest in the very best way. The board of directors was a different kind of obstacle. 3 of the 7 board members formally requested a medical competency review. They framed it delicately: concern for the company, concern for Ethan's well-being, all the careful language of people who wanted to remove someone from power without appearing cruel. What they had forgotten was this: Ethan Cole, blind or sighted, was still the sharpest mind in any room he entered. He attended the board meeting in person for the first time in months. He sat at the head of the table, a table he couldn't see but had known for 15 years, and he let them talk. He listened with the precise, dangerous attention he had developed in the darkness. He heard everything they said and everything they left unsaid. And when it was his turn, he disassembled every argument in the room with the quiet efficiency of a man who had rebuilt himself from nothing once already and was not afraid to do it again. He restructured the board, he promoted 3 people who had demonstrated actual loyalty, and he made clear, in terms that left no room for ambiguity, that his personal life was not a board matter, and that anyone who raised it as one would discover exactly how long it took him to make someone's professional life very uncomfortable. He walked out of that meeting with his empire intact. He called Ada on the way home. "It's done," he said. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am." "Are you home?" "I'm at the market. Your kitchen has no decent plantains, and I've decided to fix that." He laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. "I don't even know what that means." "You will by tonight," she said. "Go home. I'll be there in an hour." He went home. He sat in the apartment that had once felt like a prison and now felt like the closest thing to peace he had ever known. He waited for the sound of her key in the door, her footsteps in the hall, the particular melody she hummed when she was focused on something, and when it came, he felt himself exhale. A year passed, and then another. Ethan learned Braille, slowly, stubbornly, with the same ruthless discipline he applied to everything, and began reading again. He learned the assistive technology that let him run his company from a screen he couldn't see. He hired a full team of specialists who helped him adapt his workflows. He gave the keynote at a disability advocacy gala and said in front of 400 people, "I thought losing my sight was losing my life. I was wrong. It was losing a version of my life that, looking back, I'm not sure I'd recommend." The room laughed. He had gotten better at making people laugh. Ada, meanwhile, had gone back to school. Ethan had insisted. She had resisted. He had pointed out, calmly but persistently, that she had the kind of organizational mind that was being wasted on cleaning schedules and grocery coordination, and that this was frankly an insult to human potential, and he wasn't willing to watch it happen. She had told him he was impossible. He agreed. She enrolled in a graduate program in healthcare administration. She cried about it once, quietly, when she called her mother to tell her, not from sadness, but from the particular overwhelm of receiving something you have wanted for so long that you'd stopped letting yourself want it. Her mother asked if she was happy. Ada looked across the room at Ethan, who was on a call, who couldn't see her looking at him, who nonetheless seemed to sense her attention because he tilted his head slightly in her direction, the way he always did, like a compass finding north. "Yes," she told her mother, "I really am." They were not a perfect story. There were hard days. Days when Ethan's frustration boiled over. Days when Ada felt the weight of her own life bearing down and had nothing left to give. Days when the distance between their worlds felt geographical rather than emotional. They fought. They navigated his pride and her independence with varying degrees of grace. They made mistakes and apologized. Ethan, to his credit, became significantly better at apologizing, though it remained clearly painful for him. But they also had this. They had the evenings when Ada described the sunset over the Hudson, and Ethan listened with his eyes closed and somehow saw it anyway. They had the mornings when he made her coffee, badly, stubbornly, insisting on doing it himself until he got it right, and she drank it without complaint, even when it was terrible. They had the quiet Sundays when he read to her in the voice that had once only spoken in commands and now knew how to be gentle. They had the fact that he had found her in the dark, not despite his blindness, but because of it. Because without the ability to assess and categorize people away by the things he could see, their appearance, their status, the performance of their position, he had been forced to know Ada as she actually was. Voice, laughter, kindness, strength, the person behind all the things that eyes so easily mistake for the whole truth. He had touched what was real, and he had refused to let go. There is a question people ask about love and blindness, as if the two are opposites, but here is what Ethan Cole would tell you if you asked him. He would tell you that he saw more clearly now than he ever had before the accident. Not the world. The world remained dark, but people, specifically one person. He would tell you that love, real love, does not require eyes. It requires attention. It requires the courage to reach towards something in the dark without knowing exactly what you'll find, and the grace to hold on when your hand finds something extraordinary. Ada Mensah walked into his darkness, and without a single lamp, without a single photon of light, she lit the whole place up. And so ends the story of a man who lost his sight and found his soul, of a woman who came for the salary and stayed for the love, of two people who were, against every odd and every obstacle, exactly what each other needed. They didn't see that coming, but then again, neither did you. If this story moved you, subscribe. We tell stories like this every week, and drop a comment below. What was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? I read every single one. See you in the next one.